I'm really excited to introduce this next session, which is Decoding Diversity. So this session is really around talking about the importance of equity and inclusion around CS. And so just to introduce our panel, we have moderating, we have Felix Flores from Yes We Code. So Felix Flores Jr. is the National Director for Yes We Code. This is a national initiative to help 100,000 young women and men from underrepresented minorities and backgrounds find success in the tech sector. It was founded by Van Jones and the late, great Prince. So Yes We Code just launched a $46 million scholarship fund to help Black and Latinos get into tech. So I think that deserves a round of applause. And we have, for our featured panelists, we have some incredible thought leaders. We have Antonio Tijerino from the Hispanic Heritage Foundation. And Antonio is president and CEO of the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, which focuses on education, workforce development, leadership, and public awareness, in addition to promoting cultural pride and accomplishment. We also have with us today Beth Rosenberg, who is the founder and executive director of Tech Kids Unlimited. She's an educator with over 20 years experience teaching students and teachers. She founded Tech Kids Unlimited in 2009 after realizing that her son, who learns differently, loved technology but wasn't being exposed to it during the school day. And then also with us today, we have Laurie McRobbie of Indiana University. Laurie is a faculty member at IU's School of Informatics and Computing. She also helped to found the Serve IT Service Learning Clinic, and she played a crucial role in the establishment of IU's Center of Excellence for Women in Technology, which seeks to create, foster, and improve academic and professional opportunities for women students, faculty, and staff working in or with technology. And we also have with us Sarah Echohawk, who is with the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. And Sarah is the CEO of the society, and she is an enrolled member of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. And I'll go ahead and hand it over to Felix to get us kicked off.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. Well, good morning, everybody. How you feeling? Great. Well, welcome to Decoding Diversity. My name is Felix again. We've got a great panel here. I'm excited to speak to them and hear them share a little bit about their views about inclusion and diversity when it comes to computer science, particularly as we see an angle of it for children. How do we make that more inclusive at that level? So before we get started, though, I want to see just a show of hands. How many of you were introduced to computer science or technology in a formal way in your elementary, high school, middle school? Raise your hands, please. All right, great. So we got a good number, about half and half. For those of us that are parents, we're starting to see that number is being reduced in regards to how many students are introduced to computer science and tech. And if you were reading the news yesterday or this morning, the expected budgets for education is showing that some of those programs are going to fall off as well. So we're going to take an angle today and talk a little bit about how we can create diversity and inclusion, particularly at the children, at our children's experience and at the education levels at that range. So one of my first questions for the panel here is that as we get started with this, I would love to hear what your vision for inclusion looks like when it comes to particularly young people, if we can think of that elementary, middle school, high school age. With proximity, Antonio, I want to let you kick it off first to hear a little bit about what you would want to see. What would that look like?
I want to start actually to the point where we need to make sure that you have access to technology. And that's something that really isn't looked at as much as it should be. The inequity in terms of some minorities and other rural areas that actually don't physically have access to hotspots, Wi-Fi, to broadband, to actual computers. We did a study that found that Latinos were most likely to not say that they didn't complete their homework because of access to technology, a lack of access. We followed by African American. Also, most likely to say their grades suffered because of that. Most likely to do your homework on your cell phone. Most likely to do your college applications on your cell phone. So this is an area that I think needs to be looked at, and we're looking at that. It's called the homework gap. It's been called. The other part is, with 9 out of 10 schools, I think last told, not teaching computer science, that we have to get creative in terms of working through the schools to provide that access to students. And we're very proud to partner with the Infosys Foundation USA in our Code as a Second Language program, CSL. What was interesting is we thought it would be an after-school program, and it was actually brought into this classroom by the teachers themselves and by the administrators and by the superintendents and then by the cities. This program has expanded within the last 3 years since we created it in Boyle Heights to over 25 markets, and thanks to companies and organizations like Infosys Foundation USA, but also because we started it with no budget. You can't let impact get sidelined by a lack of funding. Because we have access to technology, we should have an opportunity to really have that impact. And the last thing I want to say is that a 15-year-old kid right now in their bedroom can reach more people than Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Cesar Chavez could in a lifetime combined. And we have to be able to provide that opportunity for them.
Hi, everyone. In 2009, when my son, who was diagnosed on the autism spectrum at 2 years old and had all sorts of therapy for 5 years after that, in 2009, when he realized that his 12-month IEP, Individualized Education Program, included school, he was like, I don't want to go to school in the summer. And I was an educator my whole life. I actually have a degree in art history, and then went back to school and did more comp sci stuff, but later on. But I'm a parent first. Like, I'm a parent who believes that diversity is disability. And so it's been our incredible joy for the past couple of years, really since 2009, and then when we became a non-for-profit in 2014, to serve students with autism spectrum disorder. We really try not to turn anyone away. We want some level of verbal, like it could be a little bit of expressive language. And all of our students are different. I loved the Infosys video that we just saw. It just was beautiful, because we say that all the time. We say our kids are different, but they are capable and they have strengths. And so computer code is predictable, and our students love that. And what we do is we have developed a model where students with disabilities, with autism spectrum disorder, emotional and learning disabilities, these students can be taught. I just wanted to note that, like, the New York Times had 2 articles today on disability, and one of the things they said in today's New York Times article said, society is failing disabled people. And I sort of refuse to have my son be another statistic. He will not sit in the living room watching TV for the rest of his life, which is what so many people with disabilities do. He will contribute to the world, hopefully in the technology field in some way. And so that's what we're trying to do at Tech Kids Unlimited. We feel like there are unlimited possibilities for these kids, and they love technology, and they're passionate, and they should be the future technologists.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be here. Pleased to be able to participate. I think I'm maybe a token higher ed representative from Indiana University, but I spent about 25 years in the tech sector in research and education and in education at the higher ed level and at the national level, and still am working in that area at IU. But my background is actually not as a technologist. I was a history major in college, and I kind of fell into computing in the early 80s when it was kind of the next cool thing, and first PC had come out, and the internet protocols were being standardized, and the field needed liberal arts people like me to help translate what the technologists were doing, and that's really what I made my career around, and it gave me, I think, a good perspective on what it means to have lots of different kinds of people involved in thinking about how you apply these technologies and what they mean. And that, I think, underlies what, when I think about what diversity means, it really is this sense that it's everyone, and including the one population that tends to often get left out of definitions of diversity, which are white men. It includes everyone. It needs all of us. And it's not just because it's, I think from the perspective certainly of equity, and I think your comments, Beth, about thinking about disabled populations or differently abled populations is really crucial in thinking about this. It's that the tech environment, which really is becoming everything, needs a diverse set of people involved in it for it to become everything it can be and to deliver on the kinds of promises that tech-enabled solutions can bring our world. And these are certainly economic, but they're also social, and they're also about economic justice and social equity as well. So diversity from a personal standpoint is about including everyone, but diversity is also about ensuring that our world reflects, and the solutions that we're trying to develop enabled by technology reflect the needs of a diverse and globalized world.
Nawa, hello. I am Sarah Echohawk. I'm an enrolled member of the Pawnee Nation. And I'm laughing a little bit here that they dug up my Twitter handle because I didn't give it to them. And that I haven't seen that in like 6 years or something. So I better check that out. Anyway, so thank you so much for the invitation to be here. All too often, Native Americans are just left out of the discussion completely. We're usually, if we're lucky, in the other category on all of the data, primarily because we're a small percentage of the population. And when I talk to folks about diversity and companies about diversity who bring that issue to me, my response is, you can't say you support diversity and leave out the first Americans. I don't care how small the number is. You can't say we support diversity and leave us out. So I want to start with that. Quickly, a few things when we're talking about American Indians. We are sovereign nations. There are about 567 tribal nations within the United States, each one with their own sovereign government. They have a government-to-government relationship with the federal government. They have a status higher than states. So it gets very complex when you want to work with tribes. Now there, of course, are urban Indians as well, and I can talk about that if we get to it in this discussion. But I just want to point out that when we talk about reaching Native American students, we need to think about dealing with the tribes and building relationships with tribal leaders first and foremost so that they understand the importance of, for us, in the organization I work for, STEM, which of course includes computer science. So building those relationships, getting that message across to tribal leaders is important. And then equally important is making it culturally appropriate. The setting in which Native kids grow up, especially if it's a reservation setting, is very different, I think, as we were talking about with rural areas. You know, the settings that these kids are growing up, where there's certainly the digital divide and all of those issues, but there are also cultural considerations that need to be made. And just delivering kind of a boxed lesson for coding or anything of that nature without putting it in cultural context is not going to be successful.
Awesome, thank you, Sarah. Actually, it's a great segue as well. I'm gonna actually keep the mic with you for a moment.
Okay.
And that with diversity, there are a number of barriers that we're trying to tackle. So I'm interested in hearing, you started listing a little bit of what you felt the barriers were for your work. And I would love to hear from each of you of kind of what is the barrier that you find yourself tackling. And I would love to hear a story example of where it's been effective, of where you're able to change minds, influence, spread the word, or break down a barrier at all.
So you want me to start?
If you could, please.
Yeah, so for an example, and actually I have, I was talking about this paper, and I have a few copies of this that we put together with some other folks in the Native American community and with Intel about what is important if you're trying to boost access to STEM for Native communities. So there's actually a number of recommendations in here. So I would say that in itself is an example of success when we actually do have the opportunity to engage with large corporations or someone like Infosys and talk about how to access our communities and what we can do. And specifically what we're working on right now as an example to kind of overcome that is developing culturally appropriate CS curriculum for middle school and high school students. So that's a major undertaking that we're just beginning, but we're working on that. So.
Laurie, Beth?
Yeah, well, we're working obviously at the college level. I think the pipeline leading into college is crucial. One of the, just make a quick comment about the fact that movements to get CS pushed down, if you will, earlier and earlier in the educational pipeline is absolutely essential, so that at the point students are coming to college, they're at a point where they can engage more meaningfully in a variety of disciplines in terms of how they pursue their interest in tech. The work that I do is principally around gender, but gender, of course, in a variety of forms. So it does intersect with ethnicity and race and so forth, and we pay a lot of attention, or try to pay a lot of attention to where those intersections happen. There are a lot of barriers, as we all know, but the one that comes to mind most immediately is really something that I think has been with us and continues to be with us and continues to be something we're all aware of, which is just stereotypes about what it means to be techie, what it means to be in CS, and especially for women, breaking down some of the stereotypes around who is a techie person. And it's usually not what they look like. It's usually a guy, it's usually a white guy, it's maybe even a guy without a lot of great social skills, it's a, et cetera, et cetera. You know the stereotype. And those, I've worked with a few of those, but I will say I've worked with many, many, many more that are not like that at all, with whom I have, as a woman, have much more in common than I do with some of my fellow women. And so looking for those commonalities has always been important, but being able to break down what that stereotype of what it means to be involved in tech is something we constantly work towards. And some of that gets to work in unconscious bias and stereotype threat, those concepts that help us address the way people, just constructs around what people think about when they think about tech.
So I'm writing some notes for myself, because if I have a little ADHD myself, so if I don't write things down. Okay, we have barriers in the autism community, and they run the gamut from students who come to us who can't read, they're dyslexic, they're dysgraphic, they can't write, they have tantrums, they have they want everything perfect. If they can't have it perfect, they'll push the computer away, and also things like, some students are obsessive. I had a student, we had a 1-week workshop, and he had to write a small narrative in a Word document and then translate that to an animation. And it was like day 2, and he was working on, he told me a sequel to Superman and Batman. And I saw that he was on page 1 of his narrative, and I was like, that's it, that's the end. You had 1 day to work on your narrative. Now we've got to take the narrative to, the computer and illustrate it. And he could not, deal. And then our solutions and strategies related to a student like that is our social worker. So all of our classes have social workers, because the piece around the social emotional is incredibly important for all students, but especially students with autism spectrum disorder. And then we use a lot of special ed techniques, and including a very large staff. So we have 3 to 1. For every 3 students, there's an assistant teacher, including a master tech teacher in the classroom and a social worker. And also we pay everyone, because teaching, to me, is a real job. It's not a volunteer position. And the people that we hire, which are very much like undergraduate and graduate students, they are obtaining a skill, and they need the skill. And then they use it, and they put it on their resume, and then they get jobs, because once you work with a special needs student, then companies say, oh, you're patient, oh, you're collaborative, oh, you can work well with people. So the other thing that we do is we have a vocabulary list in the classroom where we write everything down, a schedule on the board, because students need to know, they have to have a visual schedule, they need to know, then we have break time, because if we ask them to do too much, over this 3-hour time slot that we work with on Sundays, that's not good for them either. And then we have small challenges. But one other thing that I'm really excited about that I just wanted to briefly say is that we know that the whole idea of hiring young adults with disabilities is very, very difficult. There's a couple of organizations that are tech companies that are trying to figure it out. And so what we decided to do, because our students are not ready to have internships or anything like that, is we took our teen program and we made it into a digital agency. So it's called the T3 Digital Agency for Talented Tech Team, and the students work on real client projects, and they all get paid $25 at the end of a session in an Amazon gift card. And so that builds collaboration and critical thinking, because the students have to work in a team to create a website or an app or marketing materials or something like that. So that's just a little bit of our barriers and strategies.
Appreciate that, thank you.
So one big barrier is that you want to be what you see, and we don't necessarily have the representation at the highest levels in terms of, for all of our communities that are represented here and in this audience. And so you want to make sure that there's a sustainable pipeline to delivering that talent at the top levels or into the industries. And I think when you hear the word pipeline, it's not really a pipeline. It's a funnel. You feed it like this, and a little trickle comes out, and everybody fights over the trickle. That's not a pipeline. So our biggest challenge, I think, is, because there's a lot of great organizations like ours and a lot of others that are introducing kids to technology, introducing them to coding, games and everything else. And we wanted to make it look, what's the continuum? After you inspire them, ignite them, then where do you go from there? What's that second piece? So we created something called Hacking a Career in Diversity, where you actually sit down with professionals and talk through what that career might look like. And then we do coder summits that we do with Infosys Foundation USA, where they actually know how to code. Hopefully we're bringing them to IU and other great universities so that they can get degrees. And then they get put into our coder summits that we do all over the country, where they're actually already programmers, and we provide opportunities for them to learn about what the industry, what paths they can take, talk to experts, how to interview and everything else. And then they're in our network where we need to give them a dev boot camp, specifically to certain languages. And I mean, what we heard from our friends in Silicon Valley is that by the time they get done with a computer science degree, they're already like 5 years behind what the industry needs. So that's a critical piece where you have to, because that's an excuse for companies not to hire them. Oh, they're not exactly what we're looking for. Well, let's be precise and surgical about how to precisely do that. And then the last piece is, of course, pushing them into the industry and giving them that sense of responsibility that they shouldn't just walk around like a brown unicorn carrying a backpack, that they need to have a responsibility, that they represent much more than just themselves as they're in the industry, and circle it back. And I have to also commend Alberto Avalos, who's the guy that does our work, and he should be up here instead of me. And so the work needs to be done, and I know we partner with a lot of organizations like yours, and I'd love to partner with yours, because it's a collective effort in terms of what we need to do. And we need to get more creative. I always feel as though tech companies, for instance, are very creative about the solutions for their products. They're not necessarily creative about the issue of diversity, and they really need to be innovative in that space.
Awesome, thank you. We have a few minutes before we're actually going to open up the floor to the audience to ask some Q&A for us here. But a question I have for you is, to make this kind of real for the people in the audience and those that are listening and watching online. You mentioned a little bit, Antonio, about the exposure, the inspiration. How would you talk to a parent or an educator who wants to get their kids excited about tech, informed about tech, inspired by tech? What's the advice that you would give them to kind of break that ice and to kind of open up that pipeline for them. This is open to the whole crew, so one or all.
The first thing I would say, there's 500,000 jobs that aren't being filled right now, and that there's going to be 1 to 1.4 million within the next 4 years. And the starting salaries are life-changing in terms of for a family or a community. So there's a starting point, and in terms of also what other access they're going to have, to impact.
For us, parents, when they find our program, they really want their students, their children to make friends. Having a community is really, really important to them. And so when we do evaluations, like one of our first evaluations was like, can the kids just hang out more together? Because they really have no friends. And then we created like a teen social night, where on Friday night, like we just order in pizza, and the teens we just did it the other week, and the teens saw a music performance that was happening in our space at NYU, and they did a little bit of this program called Groove Pizza. And then we did the first ever special needs hackathon, which was a whole day event sponsored by Infosys Foundation, which was for many teens like the first time they ever were at a hackathon. So community is like super important.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. A couple things that we do at the college level, and I think goes to your point about this funnel that's getting to the trickle. Part of that, I think, is understanding tech as something much broader than we use the label computer science that, at least for some, tends to mean a specific discipline or it means you're going and you're going to code 24/7, something like that. When we're really talking about enabling people to be able to function in a tech-intensive society, and lots of jobs that may involve some coding, but a lot of other things too. At IU, in the School of Informatics and Computing, we have a couple of programs. One called Serve IT that Stephanie mentioned at the beginning, which is a service learning program that puts teams of undergraduate students together and sends them out into the Bloomington community to serve nonprofits with IT solutions. They're typically maybe websites, databases, things like that. So the end product is something that is obviously very important to the organization. These are organizations that typically can't afford to have a full-time or even part-time computer support person on staff, so we're providing that service for them. The students get exposed to the nonprofits with social justice missions. For some of these students, it may be the first time they ever actually encountered a homeless person, a victim of domestic violence, a person with food insecurity, those kinds of things, because the students also have to do direct service in addition to providing the IT support. But several key things about this is that the students are working in teams, and they're having to learn those kinds of collaboration skills. They're building community not only with each other, but with the larger community outside the university, and breaking down some of those town-gown barriers and giving them some real-world experience in actually applying what they're learning in the classroom to something that's real, they can touch, and that is meaningful to them. And these students, the clinic has now been going for 7 years, and the students that come out, all the students in the school, typically all of them have jobs waiting for them. When they come out, they're very employable in terms of the skills they have. The students coming out of this clinic, we've heard from a number of companies, are at the top of their list because they've had that real-world experience. And not in tech companies, obviously. So things like that are making a big difference in terms of how we can change the idea of what it means to be involved in tech. And to a parent who's thinking, wants to encourage their daughter to pursue a tech career, there are experiences they can have that put her in touch with real-world problems. So that's one thing we're doing.
Sarah, do you want to add
Sure,
anything?
I'll be quick. In terms of talking with parents, like Antonio said, I think it's important to point out the opportunity that's there, and especially when we're talking about Native kids, often the parents they don't even know what STEM or computer science or any of that is, and if they do, they think, of course, that's not us or not my kids. Beyond that, I would say when we're talking with parents and families, in tribal nations is to talk about the importance of STEM and tech, specifically for economic development within tribal nations and tribal economies and the importance there. And often I think that connection is missed. And the example that I use most often is in the late 60s and early 1970s, there was a push among American Indians to train lawyers within their communities in order to assert their sovereignty and their rights, and to be sure that they were doing that. Because for so long, for American Indian people, things have been done to us or for us in our best interest. So this idea of self-determination is very important. And so today, when we look at the landscape and we think about how do tribes exercise their self-determination, it's through the workforce, through tech, right? So if we're going to involve, we're going to create our tribal infrastructure, IT, and other systems, then we need to train experts within our communities that can bring that expertise rather than relying on those from the outside. And for those who are familiar with the issues that were at Standing Rock, one of the examples that I use there is that if tribes have that kind of expertise within their communities, then they're better able to make those decisions and have shape that policy and be at the table and understand what is happening to them and how they can play a role in making the decisions about what happens to them. So I think that's a key message that we talk about with tribes and with parents and community members about why should we care about STEM or computer science, for our communities. How does that relate to us?
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. I want to open up to the floor. If there's any people who want to ask any questions, we have someone running around with a microphone for us. Stephanie, thank you. When you ask your question, we'd love for you just to kind of say your name, organization you're part of, and if the question is directed to the whole panel or an individual. We got our first one over here.
Hello, my name is Raymond Ely. I'm Executive Director of STEAM Coders, a program based in Pasadena, California. We target underserved and underrepresented students of color. And one of our biggest challenges is getting the parents motivated to support the kids' interest in STEAM. And what we find is that we compete with a lot of after school and weekend activities, primarily sports, and the other one being apathy. And do you have any suggestions on how we get parents motivated? We deal with kids elementary, middle, and early high school, so we're totally dependent upon the parents to sign the kids up for the classes and to bring them to classes. And one of the other challenges is that when we get the kids engaged, we do run into a situation that was mentioned by, I think, Mr. Antonio, where children don't have the technology to continue the learning process at home. So after school, we have a captive audience. On weekends, we get those kids that we can get, but we don't have a way to reaching them when they're not physically with us because they don't have the technology, they don't have any of the equipment, they don't have access to the internet at home. And as someone mentioned, it's very difficult to do this on a smartphone. So any suggestions you can have for us to get the parents more motivated? I
have just one thing that we do, which has worked out really nicely, because when you have a special needs child, there's just so much information that the parent needs to grapple with in terms of like, how do I insure my kid? How do I get Medicaid? Which is, can provide all sorts of like respite services. How do I get the school to recognize his IEP or whatever? So what we started doing is on the weekends, we have free parent lectures at the same time that the kids are in classes. So that could be a possible help. Like if you offer something to the parents that they need, possibly like things about financial aid for colleges and the system, how to fill out the FAFSA form or anything like that, maybe that could help. Because we find that we bring in people to help our parents, anywhere from like psychologists to special needs lawyers to special needs financial advisors, and parents will stay for that.
It's a great question because that's a big issue right now, is that parental engagement piece. So we actually do something in Oak Cliff, Dallas, where we bring about 150 to 200 kids together to do their homework especially over the summer, where you have a drop-off of like 20 to 25% for kids of color over the summer, including mine, except they're not disadvantaged, they're just lazy. So one of the things that we try to do is connect them to the internet, provide them with computers, build out a curriculum for them to actually continue. And the way we get the parents involved is by providing that access to the parents to be able to find jobs, to work on their resumes, like what you were saying. What is that carrot for them as well? And then when you call and say that the kid can't come unless you come too, and you have to do it on a convenient time for them. You know, don't do it on a Sunday, because our people go to church. Don't do it on a weekday, because our people work 2 or 3 jobs. So if it's a Saturday morning, make it at a time that isn't going to conflict with the games and everything else. It's hard to do that, but the parents will come and also serve food. We had chicken, and they showed up.
If you want.
Yeah, no, I was going to take a little bit different tack and talk about the sports piece. So something that happens with Native kids is we have something called res ball. It's basketball. Basically, it's very big for Native students. They like to play basketball. And so one of the things that there's an organization that we work with that does is they've tied res ball into mathematics. And they've created an amazing program, and I won't go into a lot of detail. But what they found is then they come in and they demo this to the kids, like in the school. And then the kids get excited because they want to be involved because it's sports. And so, of course, then they go home and they tell their parents that they want to be part of this. And so it's just kind of reframing, you know, getting some other way to engage them with something they're interested in, because of course they want to play basketball. So, and then they don't realize that they're going to also learn math while they're playing basketball. So anyway.
Just one quick thing, it really doesn't so much address parents, but it does indirectly, I think, through supporting students. We have Indiana University is a multi-campus university. Our campus in Indianapolis is an urban campus. And that, the School of Informatics and Computing on that campus has a program, it's called Indiana Diversity Enhanced Workforce, which is has a lot of support from companies and the federal government, so a lot of sponsorship, and it goes in. There are 4 schools in Indianapolis that are low income, drawn very low income populations, and populations that are underrepresented in STEM fields to the max, and sending educators into those schools and to work with students throughout the school year and in the summer. And because of the sponsorship that IDO has been able to bring, the students are paid. So obviously, for a lot of students, taking a whole summer to go to a computer camp is just not an option. Even if the computer camp was free, they've got to be in the workforce earning money. So they get paid to go to these programs during the summer. The hope is that over the course of their high school lives, they'll be better prepared than when they hit college or their post-secondary education. But we pay them to come and learn.
And while we get the next question queued up, one of the questions that STEAM coders had was about equipment and access. You know, this isn't necessarily a cheap sport in regards to that you can just go ahead and do it. You need to have the computers and such. Have either or any of you ran into that being a barrier, and if so, what are kind of the ways you're tackling it?
Go to companies, ask them for their old computers. Even that's a pain, but that's part of it. And if you're too proud to beg, you should get out of the nonprofit business. The other thing is, and really, you just really have to dig and work through employee resource groups with some of these companies in terms of trying to get, they're usually great champions for you internally, because we just had a meeting with a big company that they said that they were throwing out hundreds and hundreds of computers, or recycling them actually. And we said, well, what better sustainability model is it than somebody using it for another 3 years? Set up also tech centers where that you would have 5 to 10 kids on one computer. That way you can reach more on the few that you have. And then hotspots, invest in a hotspot that you can then lend to them and have them connect to the internet that way. That way it's not as expensive as it is to have the place set up for it. But you can get
awesome.
Just going to add, it's companies, also universities. If you've got a university in your town, IU is huge, so we are cycling lots of computers through. And we've been, through our Serve IT program and some other programs in Indianapolis, putting computers into Boys and Girls Clubs, Girls Inc., these organizations that are serving kids. And because we have life cycle replacement programs at IU, these computers aren't even necessarily all that old. There's still a couple more years worth of life in them.
Yeah. And you got Pasadena City College and Caltech in your backyard there. So awesome. All right, next question. There you go.
Yeah, Erin Hogaboom with the National Girls Collaborative Project. I thank you to the panelists for having such a candid conversation. I think that's really important at this time. So my question is about intersectionality, that many of our youth and kind of end users identify with multiple communities. And so if you have any specific examples of interesting partnerships that you're either working on now or thinking about working on in terms of serving kind of the holistic child or youth.
I appreciate you bringing that up. I was hoping someone would bring up intersectionality. Opinions on it?
I don't know how much this will help. Kind of touched on your question, but we are part of something called the 50K Coalition, which is the goal is to train 50,000 diverse engineers by 2025. So that could be computer engineers, and that right now there's 30,000. So we train 20,000 more, and so we are working with the National Society of Black Engineers, Society of Women Engineers, and Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. To work on that, and there is a set of goals within that, and there is a larger coalition that is being built right now, and there is a K through 12 component. And so I just encourage you to go at 50k.org and check that out.
One thing that we do at Tech Kids Unlimited in our teen agency is most of our real world clients are basically social service agencies, other non-for-profits, that are working around issues around disabilities. So, for example, our teens were working on a website for an organization in New York called Job Path, which gets jobs for people with disabilities. And so it's kind of an interesting meta thing that the students are working on, trying to create a website around job coaches, matching job coaches with individuals with disabilities, and they themselves are an individual with a disability. And so I think that it really maybe helps them to some degree, I don't know if I'm answering your question, around self-advocacy and for themselves in terms of how to identify themselves. And that's a very, very big issue in the autism world. Like, do I disclose or do I not disclose? And also, what are the words? Like, autism, nonverbal learning disability, whatever it is. So it's complex.
You got to get creative. So one thing we did was with the Entertainment Software Association and White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and there's one of the guys right there, Laura and Stephanie, when she was there, where we challenged minority youth to develop a video game that addresses social issues. And these weren't just cute ideas, they actually had to develop them. And then we foster that innovation, social innovation, by supporting them through a grant where they would continue to create and then potentially even funnel them into the industry as a video game developer. But more importantly, those are career paths into cyber and other areas, just simply by playing a video. So if you like to play video games, which our communities over-index, if you thought about creating one, and then, hey, this is a pathway to a career in tech, and it was remarkable, the talent that we got. The other one that I just want to mention, because we did it last week, I think a couple weeks ago, so after our CSL program, kind of the continuum piece, so we had taught all these kids how to code in the San Jose area. Google approached us about how to use certain products that they had that they had available that are kind of marketing tools, very specifically the Primer app, which is awesome, by the way. In like 5 minutes, it helps you with marketing. And onboard those kids through Google Volunteers to then place them with Latino small businesses, like the little panerias and places like that don't think about an online presence. And so we called it a digital marketing fellowship. And so this summer, they will be working for these small businesses, doing their social media and other digital marketing while they're being mentored by Googler volunteers. And it's just those kind of programs. And it's a continuum of being able to work with others in terms of a project, help creating an ecosystem within your own community that you can depend on. And a lot of these companies, my wife was a small business owner, you're so busy just trying to run the business that you don't necessarily think more forward in terms of growing the business through a social media platform. And it worked out great. So you just really have to get creative in terms of leveraging resources, who you partner with. And another partner of that was the Greater San Jose Chamber of Commerce. So we pulled together like 5 or 6 different groups and we're able to get it done.
Awesome, thank you. Next question in the back.
Hi, yeah, my name is Vinay, and I'm involved in a logic education program at Stanford University. The goal of our program is to teach the kids to think clearly and be confident in all areas of their life. So this year we are running a computer science logic institute, and we are offering 20 scholarships to students coming from underrepresented communities. I was wondering if you guys have any suggestions on how we can effectively reach out to students that would fit this population.
Send the link, go forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Easy enough. Any other last questions out here? Got one in the front.
Hi, good morning. Sergio Rosas, Program Director at the Center for Innovation and Technology at the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. A lot of our program is focused on working with local technology companies and our local community college and youth source students in the LA area to connect them to not just work-based learning activities that really expose them to careers in tech, but also connects them to internships at those local companies. From your perspective and your experience, what sort of feedback have you gotten from employers? And 2, what are some areas that employers can do a better job in terms of stepping up to really be more involved in the programming piece?
I could talk to you for 3 days about this. But well, let's open up. What are you hearing from employers that to get people better trained for these positions, these internships, and what are we able to provide so we can say, hey, we can make our people better for these jobs?
Well, I think I probably already spoke to this. I'll just probably repeat a little bit of what I was saying before about the service learning program that we have that really tries to create leadership opportunities working in tech teams. In other words, teams that have to produce, they're accountable for a deliverable to an organization, and that's made them much more attractive as employees to the companies when they go out into the workforce, as we see from hiring and what the companies are telling us. So we know those kinds of experiences are making a big difference when they're going out there. I think it's also a matter of engaging companies with what we're doing at the college level, where, and somebody mentioned how you do a computer science degree and it takes you 4 years or whatever, and by then your skill set may be somewhat obsolete by the time you get out. One of the other things that I'm involved with at IU, the Center of Excellence for Women in Technology, seeks to do short courses and e-badges and certifications in particular tech competencies, and to start developing those in concert with companies so we understand better on a almost semester to semester basis, how are things changing and shifting in the workforce, that where there might be a gap that's not being filled by the traditional curriculum, and we might be able to fill that with a short course or an e-badge certification.
Like our moderator said, that's actually a very long conversation we could have, but I think what I would say is that you need to define the value proposition to these companies and let them know that they don't have a choice. This shouldn't be done for altruistic reasons or to support communities. It should be done to support their businesses. You have 10,000 baby boomers that reach retirement age every single day over the next 20 years. You have our populations, which are not just growing, but already represent 1 in 4 students in terms of Latino, and it's a minority majority in terms of the overall population, school population. So I think the biggest thing is to what's that value proposition to the companies, and investing in your kids is an absolute critical part of that, and really investing in it through employee resource groups, being involved with it. It's not simply writing a check. You have to be able to work through what that model looks like along with nonprofits like yours. Otherwise, it doesn't work, because they have to be invested in that sense as well, in terms of the strategy, in terms of the delivery system. And what are those deliveries that we need to be on the hook for as nonprofits? What are they ultimately trying to get? And work backwards from there instead of forward from trying real hard. Because we don't have a choice in any of this. We're all part of a collective solution in order for our country to move forward, not just our communities.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a great note to end on. That diversity isn't necessarily a kind of social cause that you can like on Facebook and say, you know, I did my part, but more so it's going to be a necessity for our economic growth. If you can care as an economic patriot, I think we've got a chance to be able to make some differences. Statistically, you know, that there is data out there that shows about what retention looks like, you know, penetration of markets, being able to actually be more inclusive on a global market on our end. And so this is necessary work. I want to give a round of applause for our panel for doing such a great job today. Enjoy your rest of the day at CrossRoads. We want to say thank you for spending your morning with us. And yeah, we hope to have a good time. #InfyCrossroads.
And thank you to Felix for doing such a great job as moderator.